Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the August 2021 Textual Study on Bible and Beyond discussions. I'm your host, Shirley Paulson, and our presenter this evening is Dr. Hal Taussig. In this study, we'll be talking about the Thunder Perfect Mind, one of the most heralded Nag Hammadi documents. Although scholars and religious groups haven't particularly noticed this text yet, it has become one of the most engaging, recently discovered early Christian texts. Its notoriety has come mainly via worldwide artistic attention. Before I hand the mic over to Hal, I also want to mention that you can now make an ongoing pledge of support via Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Bible and Beyond to make a pledge that's just right for you. You can also make a one-off donation using PayPal or a check if you prefer. Check the chat box here or the website for details. And thank you so much. So Hal, it's all yours, and we're eager to hear what you have to tell us tonight.
Thanks so much, Shirley, for bringing us here together. As usual, on the fourth Monday of each month at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, we're going to be looking at an ancient text that was discovered in this case, in the mid-20th century, the Thunder Perfect Mind. And I know a number of you have heard some about this, and as Shirley said, often from artistic uses of the Thunder Perfect Mind. I want to start this evening, however, with just placing this in the kind of text that this is in the ancient world. We don't know exactly when this was first written, probably somewhere between the 1st century BCE and the 3rd century CE. But it turns out that this kind of literature is very frequent in the Mediterranean basin of the first several centuries CE. And I wanted to sense a little bit of what kind of language this is. It's by and large what one would call a divine language, meaning language used by a divine character. In other words, mostly this kind of literature is a divine persona speaking her or himself in the first person singular. So let me give you a couple of examples of this. Here, for instance, is the goddess Isis, an Egyptian goddess. Probably, this text is probably from the early, rather the late 4th or 5th, maybe even 1st or 2nd century BCE, and probably, but we're not sure, in Egypt itself. So here is Isis speaking from her own point of view. Behold, Lucius, I am come. Your weeping and prayers have moved me to help you. I am she that is the natural mother of all things, mistress and governess of all elements, the initial progeny of worlds, chief of powers divine, queen of heaven, the principle of the gods celestial, the light of the goddesses at my will, the planets of the air, the wholesome winds of the seas, and the silences of the underworld be disposed. My name, my divinity is adored throughout all the world in diverse ways, in variable customs, and many names. For the Phrygians called me Pesunanica, the mother of the gods. The Athenians called me Cecropian, Artemis, and by their proper ceremonies accustomed to worship me. And she goes on and on. In other words, here is a a divine female figure that is speaking in the first person. This, interestingly enough, is there's another character in the Jewish and Christian Bible that has actually very similar kind of character, but this character in the Bible is called wisdom, or sometimes called in the Greek Sophia. And I'll read you a couple of, and you'll see the same kind of voice, but this is another divine voice, divine Sophia. To you, O people, I call, and my cry is to all that live. O simple ones, learn prudence, acquire intelligence, you who lack it. Hear me, for I will speak noble things, and from my mouth will come what is right, for my mouth will utter. Turns out that she is speaking the wisdom, the person wisdom, or Sophia, is speaking in the book of Proverbs in the First Testament of the Bible, and therefore the Hebrew part of the Bible, but also a Christian part of the Bible. Listen to her speak some more. I came forth from the mouth of the Most High and covered the earth like a mist. I dwelt in the highest heavens, and my throne was a pillar of cloud. Alone I have composed the vault of heaven and traversed the depths of the abyss. Over the waves of the sea, over all the earth, and over every people and nation, I have held sway. Among these, I sought a resting place. In those territory I will abide. Come to me, you who desire me, and eat your fill of my fruits. Those who eat of me will hunger for more, and those who drink of me will thirst for more. So if we wanted to go this way, I could read you simply these divine figures from the Mediterranean about 2,000 years ago, a little more or a little less, for the whole hour, because there are these characters all over the place. Some of you may know that there's a person like this in the Christian Bible, in the Gospel of John, in the same kind of I am. And you may want to guess who speaks the I am. It's actually Jesus. Only really in John does Jesus speak the great I am, just like wisdom and just like Isis, a divine voice. And it's always a same and very similar, or very similar to what we've heard. It's the great I am. That is, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. I am the vine, you are the branches. There are 15 different places in the Gospel of John that Jesus uses the same kind of I am. So tonight, we're going to look at a fairly newly discovered text, the only copy of it, the Thunder Perfect Mind, in which there is a very similar voice. Matter of fact, I will probably say about halfway through that I think the Thunder Perfect Mind voice is most like either Isis or Jesus in the Gospel of John. But I want to stop for a moment, as we do in these kind of Monday evenings, and so that you get in on the conversation as soon as possible. Let's just pause to see what I've just read. If you have some things to say about these kind of voices, or some questions of it before we jump in to the text itself of the Thunder Perfect Mind.
This is Janet. What comes to mind when I hear the thunder perfect mind is the opposite, the still small voice. And so I'm curious about the relationship. It's not, what my comment isn't based on what you just read. I apologize, but that's.
Oh no, this is certainly related.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to articulate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you'll see, for instance, if we get a chance to look at these voices, almost all of these divine voices do have still small voices too. So depending on what they're talking about, it's loud or soft. This, what I just wrote, seemed pretty loud, but we'll see some interesting ways in which the thunder also has some small voices. I would want to suggest that this is probably not particularly a contrast, but the contrast is probably simply in what the particular divine voice is talking about.
Can I give an example in my experience?
Sure, please.
There's two times where I can say that I can relate to having heard the thunder perfect mind. One was on a train when I was a college student traveling alone overnight on a car, and I was listening to my, at that time, Walkman. I had my headphones in, and I was in a pub. I wasn't in a private bed car. I was in a public one. Anybody could come in, and I was asleep. And in the middle of the night, I heard a very distinct, "Open your eyes now." And I opened my eyes, and there was a man an inch from my face. Now, I don't think he was going to do me harm, but he was reaching for my Walkman. I think he was going to steal my Walkman. That is one example of two similar types of examples where I believe I heard the thunder perfect mind, because it was definitely not a still small voice.
One of the things that folks have done a lot in the study of thunder is not at all unrelated to this. Very often we will do exercises in which we identify in our own experience such a voice. Other things that seem important to think through before we go further in this kind of voice that was particularly, but not only, present in the ancient Mediterranean.
Hi, Hal. This is Margie Griffith.
Hi,
and
Margie.
I actually followed. I'm with you finally because my chorale had its concert yesterday, so I'm available on Monday nights. And so I read the two links in the email reminder this morning, and thank you for those. The one, well, I'm not sure if the first one is from your New Testament and the second from James Robinson's translation. Maybe you could nod your head, Shirley, if that's the case.
I'll have to check it out because I don't know for sure, but I'll check it out.
Oh, okay. So that was kind of at the bottom of, it says for the full text of Thunder, the perfect mind can be found. So those were the links. And what you just read, Hal, as you opened, was far easier to listen to than the actual text was to read. And I thought after reading them, although I've got to say that James Robinson's, where it kind of explained that it resorted into three big groupings, one being Isis and one being, well, I'm not going to.
Mot is the second voice he has, and then Mot and Isis are the two main voices that Robinson says are related.
Okay, and then there was a third section too. Anyway, I'm sorry. But it seemed like it was a lot of contradictions. And I thought, I bet this is why it did not end up in the canon. Because it's not a narrative. It's not easy to read. And I can just picture those trying to decide what was text worthy of being canon. You know, there's some of that in the canon.
There is.
We tend to skip over it.
answer your question, Margie, the New Testament translation was first, and
Yeah.
James Madison translation was the second one.
Yeah. Well, I knew that.
Oh, okay.
I guess I knew that. Okay. No, thank you. You confirmed. So I found Robinson's translation a little bit easier to understand, I think maybe because of the explanation that came first. I don't know, but it's definitely, I mean, I found it more challenging to read than the Gospel of Thomas, for instance, so, which was challenging enough.
Yes.
So I'm very interested in what you're going to share about it tonight, but I just thought in terms of your first question, not your second question.
Oh, but that's very, very helpful to know that you did read the Robinson translations as well.
I read both. Yeah.
We will probably have some time to talk about the different translations. The translations have changed quite rapidly in the last 30 years, and I think we'll be able to get some conversation with that as well. Well, let me.
I'm hoping you'll shed light on how they were used in literature. I know some of the authors that were mentioned, Toni Morrison in particular, and I'm just like, how? And Sue Monk Kidd, how did they refer to this document? Anyway. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Let's try to keep that question alive, because that's a very very cool set of answers there that I think we can bring forth. Let me, for those of you who might not have read Thunder at all, let me just read some from this. Just a little bit of background, of course. Some of you know about the text that it comes from, or the larger text, and this is a larger set of 51 documents found in the Egyptian desert in 1945, and we'll. This is just one of 51, but it probably is the second or third most read one. But let me read for a while, and I think we can get some of what Margie was talking about. Even
you're reading from the New Testament, is that right, Hal?
Excuse me?
You're reading from the New Testament book?
I am reading from, yes, a New Testament is in the book, and this translation was made by a group of me and my graduate students in 1909, or excuse me, 2009. I'm not sure, I'm sure I wasn't alive in 1909. I was sent forth from power. I came to those pondering me, and I was found among those seeking me. Look at me, all you who contemplate me. Audience, hear me. Those expecting me, receive me. Don't chase me from your sight. Don't let your voice or your hearing hate me. Don't ignore me any place or any time. Be careful. Do not ignore me. I am the first and the last. I am she who is honored and she who is mocked. I am the whore and the holy woman. I am the wife and the virgin. I am he, the mother and the daughter. I am the limbs of my mother. I am a sterile woman, and she has many children. I am she whose wedding is extravagant, and I didn't have a husband. I am the midwife, and she who hasn't given birth. I am the silence never found, and the idea infinitely recalled. I am the voice with countless sounds and the thousand guises of the word. I am the speaking of my name. Pay attention to me, to my impoverishment and to my extravagance. Do not be arrogant to me when I am thrown to the ground. You will find me among the expected. Do not share at me in the shit pile, leaving me discarded. You will find me in the kingdoms. Do not share at me when I am thrown out among the condemned. Do not laugh at me in the lowest places. Do not throw me down among those slaughtered viciously. In my weakness, do not strip me bare. Do not be afraid of my power. Do not despise my fear and curse my pride. I am she who exists in all fears and in trembling boldness. All right, so that's approximately one of 5 chapters. We think that the 5th chapter is probably an appendix. This is not from the same author. But let me stop here for a little bit to see immediate responses that you have, just first things that you, when you hear that voice, or let's first just say, well, how did that feel?
Hi, my name is Suzanne Estall.
Hi, Suzanne.
And hi, one of, I'm not sure why, but it reminds me of the God's monologue in Job.
Mm-hmm.
When God is questioning, well, you know, where were you when all this was happening? And I'm not quite sure why, but there seems to be a, maybe it's the voice of authority that seems very familiar. And I think I can visualize the speaker standing, well, the speaker talks about an audience. And I know there are studies that Job was actually perhaps a play. Which resonates with me because there's absolutely zero description. And it's like looking at characters speaking when you read Job. So that's, I thought I'd share that.
Thank you so much. Suzanne was talking about what it sounded like. Did you notice this voice having, I think she's right on target that there is an authority there, but what is striking about it also is there's other experiences that are quite clear in the voice. Did you notice something else happening to the voice besides authority?
This is Jack from Michigan speaking.
Hey,
I think what is remarkable about this language is that it is clearly contrasting language, but not exclusionary language. It's contrasting in a way that includes the volume of the spectrum of these things instead of pitting one end against the other. And I think that is something that is continuous throughout this in all of the translations that I've read.
Yes, thank you, Jack. And in one thing in the passage that I was reading here, there were 4 or 5 things that happened to her in this voice. And by the way, you want me to make a different remark about the her of it in a moment. We'll talk about her as her and not. But what was happening to her in a couple of times? She was saying, something's happening to me. What kinds of things were happening to her?
Hi, Hal. This is Martha. Can you hear me? Hi, how you doing? I agree with Jack. I read the book that you translated with your students, and what occurred to me was that it's about creation, and the language is about creation, but it's also about the process of creation at the same time. And that those two aspects do not seem to be differentiated. In other words, there's an undifferentiated sense of describing a particular moment and then being in the moment. And that's really, it doesn't seem to me to be Western. That's really interesting. That seems to be more of an embodiment and more of a presence, right? Of what is alive. It's not completely always sacred to me or divine, but it's always has the sense of aliveness or creationness. So that's my main comment, that it seems to be unlimited, undifferentiated. There's a sense of time which is not bound, right? And there's not a sense of creation as product or creation as process. That those two are not differentiated either. So that's my response, Hal. Okay.
Thank you. Let me also remind you of there are 4 lines that actually there are about 22 very much like this. Do not be arrogant to me when I am thrown to the ground. Do not stare at me in the shit pile, leaving me discarded. Do not stare at me when I am thrown out among the condemned. Do not laugh at me in the lowest places. I am she who exists in all fears and in trembling boldness. So one of the main things that the early readers of the Thunder Perfect Mind missed was 20 different lines of pain, loss, and so it looks like, in other words, people wanted to see her as powerful without, very much like I would say Wisdom Sophia, who never has any fear at all. But it turns out that she is afraid and she's hurt, but she's never too afraid to not stand up. So, for instance, I am she who shouts out, and I am she who is thrown to the ground. Hear me in tenderness, learn of me in roughness. I am mute, a mute that does not speak, and my words are endless. So it looks like this character is also quite vulnerable. And it's not just in opposites, but often, as you just noticed, this voice often will say in a run of 3 or 4 things at a time, things that have happened that are dangerous to her. Let's see. I think I had Peggy. Was that a hand?
Just a quick comment. When you were reading it, I was thinking of really the phrases that you were reading right in there as trigger phrases that many women could identify with what had happened to this person. It makes it seem more real. I think I may have only read Robinson's translation, and I was struck with the contrast. I am peace, I am war, I am this. But this thrown on the ground in the shithole, that sounds like slavery and abuse of women to me. And I lose some of the romance that you had led into with. Some of it was lovely and lofty, and then all of a sudden, not so.
Yeah, I think that Robinson actually does not want to hear the loss. in some of those things. He backs away from it in his translation. There's a couple of things for us as to think about, especially Peggy, now as you point out really importantly a certain important womanly character to this person. And when we at Union did the translation, we also saw that clearly, but we bumped up against several things in the translation that actually all of the translators had actually just ignored. And that was in 5 different places, this mainly female character of their 29 self-affirming, clear female characters, but in 5 places it's male. And I read you one of those, and I'll read it again because it's just in among a bunch of female characteristics and voices. I am the first and the last. I am she who is honored and she who is mocked. I am the whore and the holy woman. I am the wife and the virgin. I am he, the mother, and the daughter. It turns out that then later on in this same phrase, this goes back explicitly to a gender-bended queer presence. So, for instance, I am my father's mother. No, I'll stop here or start here. And I am the bride and the bridegroom, and it is my husband who gave birth to me. I am my father's mother. I am my mother's sister, my husband's sister, and he is my child. I am the slave woman of him who served me. I am she, the Lord of my child. So here you actually have a repetition of the idea that I am he, the mother. So clearly it says again, yes, I am the father who gives birth.
I noticed that the link this morning in your email, Shirley, was to a translation by George McRae, even though it seemed to be that it was going to be from a New Testament. So, because when Hal just read those verses, I was able to follow, but it wasn't exactly the same words.
Same for what I read. I read George McRae and James Robinson.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you told us that then.
But I kind of liked the new, what Hal read.
Yeah.
Some of that was easier to get, I felt.
Sure.
It made his reading a little more startling.
Right. That's right.
And interesting, the one where he read I am the mother. It doesn't say that in George. It doesn't have that gender distinction in that particular line.
I think that's one of the points I was kind of nudging at before because I've read a couple of different translations by men and women, and the language is subtly different, but it is all inclusive language. So I think that the differences in the words doesn't make it harder to understand. It actually just provides a fuller understanding, if that makes sense.
Marvin,
It does. Yeah, I think that's very helpful.
One of the ways I think of it is it takes us into a non-binary understanding. And I've always reflected on Jesus as the male incarnation of the feminine energy of God. And in that way, this voice feels very affirming of Jesus as also, I'll use Hal's word, queer, in the sense that Jesus is actually gender neutral, or that washes it out, is both feminine and masculine energy, as is the voice that we hear in the Thunder Perfect mind.
That was very helpful commentary. I think that one of the McCrae and the Robinson is, I think, presumed a Gnostic character, and I think that is a larger mistake in the field for about most of the last 50 years of the 20th century. I'm very hesitant even to think that there is something as Gnosticism. So, but I think that helps McCrae and Robinson early on in the discovery of this text, because so many of these texts were so surprising in the character that they had. I think I'm afraid that what happened often there is one leapt too quickly to the grab bag of so-called Gnosticism. So, for instance, for instance, the submerged or partial, vaguely vulnerable, masculine as well as feminine, is much more complicated than a so-called Gnostic system. So that's certainly one thing that a bunch of us have been struggling with to see, because it seems like if you assume so-called Gnosticism, then you have to go down the same road of it's all a Christian heresy. And for me, for instance, if we look at the thunder, I think that voice is most like Jesus in the Gospel of John. So when you look at Jesus and Jesus's I ams, none of them are all powerful. There is power in that, but none of it is all powerful. And Jesus, the Gospel of John is the only gospel in the canon where Jesus cries. So this is a vulnerable, somewhat powerful voice. For me, it's one of the only places that one can find a great I am that isn't super powerful, but simply powerful and vulnerable at the same time.
The writing here reminds me of, I saw the film The Grapes of Wrath when I was quite young, and it's the John Steinbeck book. And the ending is basically where, I think it's Henry Fonda as the main character, says that in terms of them coming to having a triumph, that it's the triumph of everyone that's gone through this whole, it was the Depression and everything else. And it was basically the Dust Bowl, the people that escaped the Oklahoma Dust Bowl and went to California, and the problems, the struggles that they had when they went there. And it kind of like, it says, but we're all noble, even though it seems like we're the dirt, the dust of the earth, we're all noble. And we all represent, God. We all are his children. And I think that's something that this kind of reminds me of. It's one voice, but it's speaking for everybody.
It does really, doesn't it, Diana? It reminds us with that tenderness and vulnerableness of that movie and that novel. That's very much like that very poignant phrase. I am he who exists in all fears and in trembling boldness. For me, also, again, I'm probably too interested in the thunder Jesus relationship, but it feels to me as if a bunch of the Jesuses in Paul and John and Mark are very vulnerable Jesuses, not without power, but also quite vulnerable. Well,
and noble, the nobility of it all. It's like heroic. You stand with despite all the odds, you stand and know that you are representing something that is all powerful. You represent that. You are not the all power, but you represent that as all of us together, if we stick together.
That's an interesting connection that I think we can hopefully come back to. There's someone who hasn't spoken yet that would like to jump in, because we're getting really wonderful spectrum of things here.
I'd like to say,
Thank you, Stephanie.
Whenever I hear the thunder, I can't help but hear the womanist voices. Yeah, you mentioned Toni Morrison, so Baby Suggs from Beloved. The voices of the women in For Colored Girls by Ntaki Shange. Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman? Even the women of the Joy Luck Club. The strength of, as you say, vulnerability, power within vulnerability. And I hear an ownership that I recognize how the world and society sees me, but I also recognize the power that I hold, the paradoxal vulnerability and strength within the vulnerability whenever I read the thunder. I also want to say Marvin Meyer's translation is very close to a New Testament and holds on to that femininity within the translation.
Yeah, actually, Marvin's second translation, he changed a lot of it in that direction. His first one was much more Gnosticizing, and his second, right before he died, his second translation had real interesting shifts in it. And thank you so much for bringing Toni Morrison into that, because from my point of view, Toni Morrison has such an extraordinary voice that insists on looking at loss without giving up power.
Right.
And that is a kind of character that that there is masculine white sensitivities is afraid of, and afraid to learn from, as far as I'm concerned. We can learn more from Morrison than anybody in my mind.
Right.
Other folks, there are a couple of things that I want to touch base with more in terms of the larger study of thunder. But let me see if there's some important thing. It
was me. Voices. I'm new. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi there. I haven't read. I've only read the one translation of thunder, and I'm new to this entire study. But I want to find more translations, and I want to find some more correlative things. But you know what I'm thinking of when I hear this, and I want to hear the discussion. I go beyond the what I noted, as somebody else did too, is that when I'm I'm the whore, I'm the wife, I'm the virgin, these ancient Semitic sort of stereotypes of women are blown away by the rest of the poem and by the gender unspecificity or freedom. And I'm thinking about
what we've been told by some of our greatest scientists, like Newton. I don't know if anybody's read Newton's, his reflection on how when he was close to dying, he said, you know, they say I'm a great thinker, but to me, I'm like a small boy bending over the pebbles on the beach, while out beyond me is the whole ocean of truth undiscovered. It's the wholeness of it. Somebody else was talking about that as well. And I'm thinking about Einstein, who said, you know, don't restrict yourselves to being a theist or even a multi-theist, but adore all of it. I remember Jesus said all of creation, adore all of it, all that's living, all that's non-organic, all that expresses and is creation. So I think it's very cool. Thank you for this.
Yes, thank you. Ellie, I'm seeing a comment that is coming across for you. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you just wrote? Maybe Ellie's not.
Yeah, I just, I had never thought of the grapes of wrath in connection to this. It was Diana, was it, that brought that up?
Yeah.
And just thinking of Tom Joad's speech at the end, or when he's leaving his mother, and how he's, wherever you go and whatever you see, I'll be present. I think that's really, that sense of presence is very compelling in Thunder. That the divine is not an entity, it's a presence that just extends into all the different sectors, different people in society from top to bottom. I mean, mostly to bottom, but
yeah,
the extension and the presence and being present, like in the children that are hungry and cry. And I remember the words from the song by Woody Guthrie, but it's in the novel too.
Yeah, and that's not at all far from what Stephanie was saying relative to Morrison's work too.
Yeah.
And you know, since we're in this territory, what I'd like us to note is some really important feminist readings of this, especially in terms of what basically a number of feminist authors have characterized as a caricature of the feminine. And so it's not just the vulnerability, but this text keeps putting together satirized forms of women and strong forms of women in the same thing. So I am she who is honored and she who is mocked. I am the whore and the holy woman. Those are not opposites. Those are contrasts that point out how many times women's presence is satirized, and so what this voice does is it puts it right back in, but with another kind of presence. So I am a sterile woman and she has many children. Very complex characterizations and personifications, I think, that get at what both Ellie and Stephanie have been pointing out. So that was the main. Yes, go ahead, Stephanie, please.
I wanted to say it's a character, caricature, but it's a reality too. It's a when they play with the gender. I know many women who were fathers to their children. I know many women who have birthed no children, but are mother to many, myself included. And so I think, and Helen talked about how this speaks to the Afghanistan women. I think also to the women in Palestine, that there is a reality in this of what women in oppressed situations have gone through. And I think this is why Morrison could relate to it and spoke, through to it in her writings, Baby Suggs, who she was in Beloved. And she was a preacher, but yet she was an enslaved woman who got her freedom, and her children had to come to her, and the other enslaved people who ran away or who got their freedom, to empower them in the midst of vulnerability and oppression. So I think there's a true reality in these words, that the gender role, you could be woman and still be man.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I see in it, and the power in it.
And that reminds me of when we were doing our translation at Union. We had such amazing arguments about how to translate those kind of words of a woman's voice who is on one level satirizing itself, and on another level just making the reality bigger. So for instance, we a whole week we talked about how we were going to translate the whore and the holy woman, because in the way we thought about translation, you don't want to use a anti-woman slur to do that. So we were going to say that, this would be a sex worker. But then on the other hand, we decided, we said, look, this voice wants to satirize or show how women are satirized. So then we put the slur back in, and it didn't make it cleaner. And so, frankly, we still don't know whether we thought we did it right or not.
I think you did. I think we have to. What I love about the Thunder, it's a there's a rap artist, and he has a song, and he says, "I'll be that," and he talks about how you want to co-label me and say all of this, and because of the things I do and because of who I am. And he says, frankly, I'll be that. And so the power in I am the whore, right? That's power in that, right? That you may see me as that, and I am that, but I'm also something more powerful than that. And so I think it's important that you own that the world sees you as this, and you know that the world sees you as this. But let me tell you who I really am. Let me show you who I really am. And I think that's the power in the Thunder, the whole piece, the power in that.
I mean, and we probably should have just used "I be that" as the translation. That would be. That may be the next version. That's very cool. And,
the artist is Redman, if you want to call it. The artist is Redman. That's
right. Yeah. So, and this is a larger point that we did in our book on Thunder, and that was to say, we think this is, and one of you said it earlier, this is a performance piece. This is, and it seems like one of the reasons that we only have one version of it is they were always changing it to miss the "I be that" part of the moment. And so, in other words, this is, I imagine it as a group of people, many of whom have been knocked down, thrown in the shit pile, and they shout "I am," or whisper "I am" together, and then they fill in the blanks of what I be. It feels to me that this is a collective "I am" as well.
Right. It's a it's a power statement. It's a empowering statement. Like you say, if you got to whisper it, or if you got to shout it, or if you got to say it in your head, but recognize who you are in the midst of all the madness. Let the world know, I know how you see me, but I also know who I am.
Yeah, and
know who I am.
I'm just looking at the next in chapter 4, where it says, I am a mute and that does not speak, and my words are endless. Hear me in tenderness, learn from me in roughness. I am she who shouts out, and I am thrown to the ground. So this text keeps wanting to insist on the complexity of pain and power and compassion.
Right. Totally.
Any last moments from anybody else? Well, I think this is the 4th time in 3 years that we've done Thunder, and it feels like every time we don't have enough time. So thank you, Shirley, for bringing us together.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this. You can tell that the excitement about this is growing, so we're glad you're bringing us up to speed with this, Hal. So I guess we'll have to say goodbye, and we'll thank everybody so much for being with us today. And I would just like to conclude by saying that this was the August 2021 Bible and Beyond Monday Textual Studies discussion on the Thunder Perfect Mind, one of the most heralded Nag Hammadi documents led by Dr. Hal Taussig. Once a month from 8 to 9 Eastern Time on Monday nights, generally the 4th of the month, we provide a discussion of one of the early Christian texts. Dr. Hal Taussig leads these sessions, sharing a well-framed overview of a particular text and allowing participants time to ask questions and share their insights. Donations supporting the creation of these textual study archives really are greatly appreciated. You can now make an ongoing pledge of support via Patreon. Go to patreon.com/BibleandBeyond to make a pledge that's just right for you. You can also make a one-off donation using PayPal or a check if you prefer. Check the website earlychristiantexts.com for details. And we want to thank you so much for being with us tonight. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.